we've done in previous weeks. If you've got something to say, yeah, would love to see you guys leave comments for me again. Remember, as always, if you add my Kiko Simon in the comments, it'll flash orange to me on the side over here, and I will pay attention to that. And yeah, you can have me talk about anything that you like, but otherwise I'm going to go through the topics that I have. Got a few tonight. It's been kind of a quiet week. I've been just slammed, as I often say, but I really have been. It's good to see. I'm sorry that the notice went up a little bit late tonight, so perhaps some people will be coming into this late. But yeah, let's see. In the comments, we've got Dan H. No worries for being away. I know what it's like. But I was away myself on a business trip a couple of times. Tokyo 503, salutations. Good to see you, and indeed glad to see that you're looking forward to the show. And Davo Hunter. There we go. Good evening, fellow chat folks, and good evening to you, Davo. Good to see everybody here. Hope you're having a good week. Today, of course, was the great big parade for the Emperor. I did not go and attend it. It just occurred to me that there's a story in here which I didn't include in my tweets, because I think I only put it in Japanese. But you know what? It was on there, and it should have been included, which was basically what's happening with the Olympics and the marathon. So don't let me forget that. It's all Emperor's Parade stuff at the moment. But yes, Dan H, is the Microsoft productivity part of today's news? Yes, indeed it is. That is in there. There's a few things there. That was like the most retweeted tweet, and I didn't even say anything. That was just like a retweet of a Rocket News article, which I found kind of interesting. I found it retweetable. I didn't find a lot to actually talk about at the time, but that was the most retweeted thing that I've put out there in ages. So yeah, that was super interesting. Having a debate with other people about whether to discuss that. Quinn Rankit, good to see you. Good to see everybody there in the chat. Remember, I love it when you guys say hello when you're there. Hey, Chris Jack, good to see you, Chris Jack. And actually, long time no see. Awesome. And do what? Be like Chris. Say hello. It's nice to see who's in there. You know, makes me feel less like I'm talking by myself. Not that I ever really do. But yeah, it is right now the best time of year. If you're planning a trip to Japan, this is the time of year to come. Don't come August, not even really September, August, October, but November in Tokyo. It's basically when you get into the autumn weather pattern. It's dry, it's sunny, it's not yet too cold, but the area is really clear. You can see Mount Fuji beautifully. You get all the great sunsets. The weather right now is awesome, actually. Indeed, boom, Tokyo 503. I think I said it, although I've noticed lately that the recorded version of this starts like 30 seconds after I start, so I'm always careful to delay the boom a little bit. But yes, I like the icon there. But yeah, it's been beautiful here in Tokyo anyway lately, and the year is rushing. The end of the year is rushing towards us. So yeah, I guess I'll get into the topics that we have. Maybe before I begin, I'll start with the first topic. That hey, the J Vlog, salutations, good to see you. Wouldn't it be best to go after the Olympics, as prices will be inflated? The prices of what? Accommodation. Well, that's exactly the point, though. They put the Olympics at the wrong time of year. Back in '64, they did the Olympics in October, which would have been nice. November would have been awesome, but it wouldn't really be the Summer Olympics anymore. But yes, this is the thing. They're actually holding the Olympics at the worst time of year. Put in mid-July, and that's actually part of what I wanted to talk about today. Well, that's really annoying, because I actually tweeted about this today, and I actually pointed out there was actually a couple of articles that I tweeted that were kind of interesting. Why didn't I capture those? No. Average daily incident. Oh, this is what I meant to post. So this is the problem. This is kind of interesting. I found a website which will show the average temperatures of any city that you show for any time of year. And what's super interesting about this is that you can see Tokyo's got like from freezing cold to being... Paris gets surprisingly cold. But look at that. Los Angeles is basically warm all year. Tokyo gets way too hot in summer and way too cold in winter. Sapporo gets up and to be kind of nice and comfortable, but is freezing cold the rest of the year. But this is super interesting, this graphic here. I don't know how well you can make it out. But in terms of Paris will be the next Olympics, and the Olympics after that will be in Los Angeles. So just for an idea, Paris is a small sweet spot right at the time of the Olympics in July, which will be warm and pleasant and comfortable for the months around it. Tokyo, and you know what, Tokyo, that hot part, it's not really warm and pleasant even really through July and September, although it says clearly during the Olympics time it's going to be terribly hot, as well as very cold in other times of the year. In fact, it looks like it's classified, well, as bad as Paris almost. And then look at Los Angeles, it's like comfortable all year. Like, how did they get that? Sapporo, on the other hand, warm and pleasant, where they're going to move the marathon to, right in the middle there, around July and August, but freezing the rest of the year, as you pretty much expect. So, yeah, from that basis, fascinating just to see these graphs with the sort of precipitation, clear skies. Look at that, Los Angeles, clear skies all year. Makes Los Angeles look great. I mean, I really sort of understand the appeal now from this. Interesting as well, Paris in summer has actually longer days and shorter days in winter than Sapporo, which is easy to forget that most of Europe is further north than Sapporo, further north than Hokkaido. I guess that's right, you've got that warm current in the Atlantic which makes Europe habitable, but you guys should be like in Siberian weather up there. It's kind of crazy actually just to remember that. Chance of muggy conditions. Los Angeles almost 0. Tokyo almost 100%. At least during the summertime. So yeah, it's kind of that is what summer is like in Tokyo, and that's what we are going to have that's what's causing the alarm about having the marathon. And so here's the deal for me. I've shared my thoughts on the Olympics being in Tokyo before, and they primarily are that I was against. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that the Olympics could detract. The spending in preparation for the Olympics would be taking away from the recovery from the Great East Japan earthquake, which, you know, they're still trying to rebuild, and it has, you know, taken away building and construction resources. That was my main objection. The other point is that, you know, again, when they put the bid for the Tokyo bid, they did say, hey, it's pleasant weather in summer in Tokyo, which is absolutely not. And people kind of looked at it sideways a little bit, but they weren't really thinking about it. And it wasn't really until this World Marathon or World Athletics sort of championship in, I think it was Doha, United Arab Emirates, or it was Doha in Qatar. Anyway, it's in the Middle East anyway, that they recently had this, where they got a taste of what sort of weather is going to be in Tokyo during the marathon, and all of these marathon runners were nearly dying, you know, they were collapsing and so on. And this kind of prompted the IOC to rapidly decide that although they gave the Olympics to Tokyo, they do not want Tokyo to have the marathon because it could be too dangerous. And Tokyo was trying to figure out stupid ways to offset it, which came to a point at one point of saying that they'll have the marathon at 3 a.m. in the morning, which sounds ridiculous, but, you know, in the end of the day, the IOC came and told everyone, no, we made the decision, you've got to have it in Sapporo. Now, Sapporo didn't bid to host the marathon, and they didn't bid to host the Summer Olympics. But the whole point is that for the last 2 or 3 years, they've been planning for the Olympic marathon. Now, remember that the Olympic marathon is, if you're going to hold the Olympics, the marathon is the marquee event. It's the climax of the Olympics. It's held on the final day, and it finishes with the runners coming into the Olympic Stadium just before the closing ceremony. So it's like a pretty big deal. So you're moving it to Hokkaido. That's the first problem. So they won't be able to run into the closing stadium. The second part is that, you know, the whole point of the marathon is that it's a showcase of the city that's hosting. And, you know, the Tokyo Marathon, which is held in February, I think, you know, it's a tour of Tokyo. You get to see the Sky Tree, you get to see Tokyo Tower, you get to see the Imperial Palace, you get to see all the sights of Tokyo. And everyone who lives in the city gets a chance to stand out in the street, and without having to pay $1,000 for an Olympics ticket, they get to see a little bit of the Olympics, and they get to participate. So essentially, this is like the sort of climax event for all the talk of how ridiculous it was getting about holding it 3 o'clock in the morning. I suppose if you're going to host the Olympics, this was kind of this is like the biggest deal, and this is what a lot of thought and cost was being put into. So when the International Olympic Committee decided at the last minute that they were just going to, well, not the last minute, but they decided all of a sudden without consulting anybody that they were going to tell the Tokyo Olympics to hold it in Sapporo. I'm kind of with the governor. I've generally not liked the way that the Tokyo Olympics has sort of done things most of the way through until now. But when she said, hey, if you want to go somewhere cooler, hold it in Siberia, you know, hold it in the occupied territories that Russia holds north of Hokkaido, well, you know, she was kind of being sarcastic, but honestly, it kind of made sense, actually. You know, I kind of understood where the sarcasm was coming from. So it was. Let me come back to this graphic just because I find this really interesting. So it turns out they've been looking at Sapporo, and there's a few problems. One, there's no great course that they can run up there, at least in summertime, and they need a place to finish it. But apparently the places that have gone to a big stadium like the Sapporo Dome, apart from the fact that they have to strip down all of the advertising that's used, and Sapporo Dome is used by Nippon Ham, by a baseball team. Apparently also the entrances to the stadium do not meet Olympic regulations, so they'd have to rebuild parts of the stadium. So that's being ruled out. There's another place as well, which apparently is in a park or something somewhere, which is quite popular, but it has hills and up and downs which don't meet the regulations that are required for the walking race. So the only place that is left is apparently Odori Park in Sapporo, but Odori Park also is famous throughout summer for having an enormous beer garden, which again the Olympic regulations prohibit. So they've got to figure out how to get this park to sort of close down its beer garden around the Olympics, or around the marathon race. The other problem is that it's not clear, like all the expenses of having staff, shut down roads, of hosting, having stands and so on, having spectator areas. They're still fighting over who's going to pay for this. Tokyo's adamantly said it's not going to pay for it. The International Olympic Committee is going to at least nominally cover the cost for now, but Yoshihiro Mori, he came in and he basically said the other day, he said to the governor of Hokkaido, we don't want to give you too much trouble. We'll just set a really simple course, so it's probably not going to have any scenery on it. They mentioned that the athletes need to be able to participate in the closing ceremony, so we can't do it on the final day. We'll put it in the middle of the Olympics sometime. And we suggest that you save money by just cutting down on areas that spectators can watch. So all of this kind of means, I mean, it sounds a little bit passive-aggressive in a way, but it's pretty much it. Like, the Olympics has just decided, to give away the marathon, which is, I suppose it's the one event which you would look forward to with the Olympics. And again, the problem is they're holding it right at that time of year in the middle of the chart there, with the where it's just not feasible to have it in Tokyo, and because of advertising and professional sports and so on, they can't move the Olympics to a more pleasant month like October, for example, where it would be comfortable to cool in Tokyo and easier to do. So I think the Rugby World Cup has proven that Japan's pretty good at putting these things on, and even with this kind of mess around the marathon, throwing a spanner in the works less than a year out, they'll figure it out. Who knows, there'll probably be a race in Hokkaido on a long straight road with a bunch of Tokyo signs around it or something and no people watching. It's a bit of a shame, but there again, it was easily foreseeable and it should have been addressed differently and sooner. That's pretty much it and it is a complete mess with the marathon, but they'll figure it out, I suppose. It is a shame. But that is a thing that happened. Let me come over here into the topics that I have tonight. This was just interesting. This is an article on Nippon.com from January, talking to two lawyers explaining how Japan has a 99% conviction rate. I was actually planning to go through it and refresh myself on it before the show, and I didn't have time. But basically just talking about how you're screwed if you're charged. I mean, it is, as the headline says, it's a 99.9% conviction rate. There's no CSI in Japan to speak of. They don't use technology. It's pretty much you are arrested until you confess, and if you don't confess, you'll be convicted anyway, and the sentence will be worse. So people tend to confess, even at things like murders that they don't do, just in the hope of being able to get out of jail before they die. It's really rare. There are, I know, 2 cases involving foreigners. It seems easier to make false convictions with foreigners, mainly just because there's probably a lack of patience or lack of understanding before they proceed quite often. So I know of a couple of cases involving foreigners who have gotten off, but it's really not a place that you want to get in trouble with the police. I've said this many times before, and there's a good article there, which I did retweet this week. Remember, as always, if you want to get into any of these topics, follow my Twitter, because these are all from my Twitter feed. This was kind of interesting. This I can talk a little bit more about. And believe in yourself, good to see you. So this one here is, it's another one of these surveys that look very authoritative, but it's only got like 3,900 respondents. But they survey people who are Japanese people, and they survey of them how many are involved with co-workers, which, as we've talked about in the show before, it's not unusual to hook up. There are very rarely rules against people hooking up and so on at work. It's very common to meet people who meet their other halves at the office. And apparently, yes, of a survey of 3,988 working men in their 20s, so a very specific demographic there, 30% of them have a lover in the office. It's kind of interesting. I see. So that's of the 30%, 15.1% being a co-worker girlfriend and 14% a co-worker spouse. I wonder if the remaining 0.9% is mistress or something. Who knows? Well, it'd probably be higher than that. But for a start, that's a high statistic, right? That there are 30% of people basically admit on a survey that they have their girlfriends from work. Although, yeah. Like, for example, when I joined my first job in Japan, out of like 90 co-hires, there were 5 women. Very, very low number. It was in an IT company, and nearly, I think, in fact, not even nearly all of them. One, I think, didn't. But nearly all of them hooked up really quickly with someone from within my group of co-hires and ended up marrying them. So yeah, pretty common there. And this was also when they hired, of those people who are hooking up with co-workers, generally so what is it, 41% of those that have a work co-worker, girlfriend or spouse, 41.3% said that they are older, 30% said younger, and 28% said the same, with nearly half of them being around the same age of 1 to 3 years difference, 30% being 4 to 6 years, 12% being 6 to 9 years older, and still, 1 in 20 there, 10 to 14 years, 3% saying even more than 15 years. Yes. I mean, again, it's a very small sample and honestly not really that credible a survey, but it is kind of interesting that on top of the existing, it kind of highlights for a start that it is that office romance seems to happen quite a lot in Japan. Doesn't seem like a good idea to have that. But also very, very common for those to be older. I don't really see anything in that, actually. I mean, personally, to me it's fine. There's a stereotype. There is, I guess, a general stereotype, and not just in Japan, of the woman being younger and the man being older. But I know plenty of cases, inside and outside of Japan, of that being different. Nothing wrong with that sort of thing. I must admit, when you're younger, I think the difference seems a lot more. So the idea of a 20-year-old dating a 35-year-old seems kind of creepy. When you're like 20 years old, I suppose, yes, it's kind of natural when you get older. Well, in terms of seeing, not myself, but thinking of other people, you just tend not to care as much, and you tend to recognize that people just see people as people. But, day and age, well, that's a good point. The power dynamic between them. Indeed, I guess that is interesting when you think about it. But there again, I mean, we know that the odds of the older women at work being bosses is probably a lot less. Barry Bonds, greetings right back at you. Good to see you. Half your age plus 7, Steve from Berkeley. Well, Steve from Berkeley, I'm intrigued. Half your age plus 7, is that like a formula for like an ideal match or something? I'm not sure I get that. I'm trying to think. What would that be for me? Minimum age. But why should there be? I mean, it kind of makes intuitive sense, but stop and think logically for a moment. Well, apart from the risk of having kids and dying, why should that be a minimum age? You're getting a new wife every couple of years. And by the way, and when we think of that, I must admit, when you think of the older person, it's overwhelmingly older men and younger women, right? So, what's the problem with like, for example, why should take a 40-year-old woman? Is she not allowed to date a 26-year-old, but she can date a 27-year-old? And what difference does that make? I don't think it makes logical sense. But yeah. Thanks for sharing. Believe in yourself. And maybe I don't need to linger on this. I just thought that was kind of interesting. This I found interesting. This was on BBC, and I was like, well, yes, let's talk about this terrible discriminatory practice across all of Japan, the outrage that women are forbidden in certain professions from wearing glasses. Of course, this goes on day to day, and just what a terrible... okay, I've never heard of this before. I've never seen this before. There is a thing generally that I can comment on. When I first came to Japan in 1991 on a school trip, sometimes I remembered it as 1990, but I just realized, I looked it up the other day and it was actually 1991. When I first came here, everybody wore glasses, practically even the dogs wore glasses in Japan. Japan was a country where nearly everybody wore glasses. In fact, if I had lived in Japan in 1991, I didn't need glasses, but I probably would have just bought them just to fit in. So that was kind of that. And then when I came here in 1999 to start living here, a funny thing happened between 91 and 99. Contact lenses sort of took off. And really, from the time that I came to work in Japan, it's really, really rare to see people who wear glasses at work anywhere, male or female. It just became a thing that, at the company that I'm at right now, and this is the thing, Japanese, of course, are forced to do hours of homework every night and so on. They all manage to pretty much ruin their eyes. And I don't think it's genetic. I think they do it to themselves. And in fact, the thing about needing to wear glasses in Japan, I remember I had a boss at a Japanese company who seemed to take exception with various things about me, which I was probably not humble enough about it either. I probably aggravated the situation, I'll admit. But when we were comparing it, everyone in the team had either contacts, and my boss, who was quite old, he was like 60-something, he had glasses. And everyone was talking about how they had their 0.5, 0.3, or 0.2, 0.2, whatever, and how terrible their vision was. They asked me what my most recent Kenko Shindan result was, and I was 20/20. I was 2.0, 2.0. I come from New Zealand. I'm like Heidi. I lived in the mountains. I look out my window and look at mountains at least in primary school, not so much in Auckland, but even in Auckland, I had Rangitoto Island nearby. And I didn't do much homework, to tell you the truth. I didn't do a lot of things to ruin my vision, and we have great scenery in New Zealand, so you want to have your eyes get used to adjusting to near and far things. We don't read a lot, or I didn't read a lot under artificial lights. I watched a lot of TV. I should have ruined my eyes that way. But I remember, and I'll admit to that. I'll admit that I wasn't a great reading student, for example. But I remember my boss was like, if your eyes are 20/20, like that means that's just like you haven't even studied anything. And I was kind of like, well, wait a minute, what's with the non-glasses discrimination BS? I mean, look, am I getting hassled for having good eyesight? So I was kind of I wasn't so sure about that, but this was a thing. Eyesight is universally so bad in Japan that even though you don't see glasses so much anymore, it's probably more common than not. I mean, look, I'm just tossing a number out there, but based on my experience, I would put money that there's probably more than 50% of the population uses contact lenses or some sort of vision assistance. People have bad eyesight in Japan, but you don't see glasses very often. So maybe that's part of the reason, but apparently what this is saying is that on BBC there's this thing saying that several local news outlets, and I think what this was there was a story about one particular place that did get picked up, and it got picked up because it was weird, not because it was normal, but the BBC picked it up like this is happening everywhere. And indeed this does follow on from the idea of women being forced to wear high heels, for example, which is ridiculous as well. But Nippon TV Network and Business Insider, I mean, they just found a weird story, and this is just Japan reporting a weird Japan story just like it's a normal story, which looked at how firms in different industries prohibit women from wearing glasses. They included safety reasons for airline workers or being unable to see makeup properly for women working in the beauty sector. So even the article here is saying, I mean, this is basically news about the news, and this was like a high-ranking story on the BBC. It was saying that they, it wasn't clear, i.e. they didn't bother even checking this themselves, whether these bans were based on company policies or social practice, but it started heated debates. I mean, again, I've never seen or heard of this. Okay, I'm not a woman, right? And I don't wear glasses normally, so I guess I've never run into this in any way, but apparently, a professor of a professor of sociology in Kyoto said that there were outdated policies in places, but again, it's not even clear exactly where this is. A funeral parlor. The discussion has echoes of that's the high heels, about being forced to wear high heels at a funeral parlor. I don't know why you need to wear high heels to a funeral at all. But yeah. Anyway, this story, just to be clear, this made news. It's bullshit. It's rubbish. I don't know. I mean, it might have happened somewhere, and if it did, it's stupid. And if it got news coverage in Japan, it's because even in Japan, this is considered stupid. It's nothing like normal. But yeah, I don't know what this is about. Lots of people getting LASIK, by the way, in Japan right now as well. That's kind of a thing. So I don't know. When I tweeted, why didn't they just put the trains on in fact, that's probably a highway beside the train storage place. But here's the point: train companies generally have train storage areas on cheap land, and the cheapest land that you can get is in floodplains beside rivers. So it's natural that you put the trains there, when you've got as parking areas, because land is expensive in Japan. But when there's a typhoon and a high risk of flood coming, you could put these trains on any part of thousands or tens of thousands of kilometers of track. You could put them in tunnels, you could put them on, and the idea that they need to be sheltered from the wind, they're not sheltered from the wind anyway. You could put them on literally any piece of track. You could just drive them until their elevation is just like 10 meters above anything, like a river. And you could have saved these trains. And when these things got flooded, people said, well, people probably, there was nowhere safe that they could put the trains, or they couldn't react quickly enough. But we knew for days that a typhoon was coming to Japan, and they just allowed 10 Hokuriku bullet trains to be flooded. And when I was showing that, I was like, well, that seems like a terrible waste of bullet trains. And people were saying, I wonder if they can be fixed. Turns out they can't be fixed. 10 bullet trains, and these are millions of dollars each, are basically written off from water damage, from being left sitting there near a river that was slowly over flooding and flooded the trains. So again, it seems to me like that East Japan Railway just wasn't really thinking very straight about what to do with these trains and how to make them safe. But Dan H., you find it weird that BBC only publishes weird or controversial issues that happen in Japan? Yes, and I think there's a problem that the BBC has, that although I do consider the BBC I bookmark it, the BBC is one of the news stories that I do read, it does fall victim to and it's not just a BBC, I think there is a British and a Commonwealth culture tendency, dare I say even Anglo culture tendency, to still look for news that confirms the biases that we have, particularly the idea that anything that confirms kind of negative stereotypes of Japan, that it's weird, that it's it's a country ruled by samurai that oppress women, all of these kind of people are either having too much sex or not sex or at all, or sex with weird things, or just anything kind of sexual. The whole, the idea that the country are basically all hentai addicted, like otaku, that are sexist and unable to have relationships all at the same time. Anything that feeds into this sort of these internet rumors. And the problem is that the BBC is credibly reporting Afghanistan one day and Iran and US politics, and then it's doing some story about people marrying their pillows in Japan, and it lends those already stupid but widely believed sort of old, this is basically news of the world. This is like the Globe, well, not even the Globe, what do you call it? National Enquirer, stuff like that, level crap. And when it comes to Japan, BBC is the National Enquirer. They just garbage. This is literally without fact-checking, re-reporting rumors spotted within Japanese media. So yeah, confirmation bias, all of that stuff. And it's not uncommon, it's everywhere, and this is part of what this show is about. The purpose of this is to just help you guys be a little bit aware that when you're looking at Japanese news, what to find interesting and what to call and actually realize is bullshit. And that is unfortunately, but there's a huge industry. There's a much bigger industry. If you're putting ads against news and you're trying to make money from news, there is much more money to be made on people marrying pillows and banning, forcing women to wear high heels but not wear glasses. And by the way, I mean, personally, you don't see them very often, but I've got no problem at all with women with glasses, by the way. It's kind of cool, I mean, if you ask me. So it doesn't make sense to me. It's just totally weird. But that's why the BBC has it. That's why I'm talking about it. But I'm talking about it in order to point out it's bullshit. I've never seen or heard anything of this before. Welcome to be disproven in comments or whatever. But there you go. Another thing that happened, that continues happening all over Japan, is this. Can I open this? Here we go. Whenever there's an earthquake or a big natural disaster or something like that, what happens is everybody goes and looks at the internet to go and get civil defense information, and all of these national government, all of these local governments all over Japan are basically in the 1990s with their web hosting. They've basically all got like a crappy server sitting in a server room that can't handle more than 10 to 15 people accessing it at the same time. And all of these internet infrastructure of most local governments in Japan, quite a large number, collapses if anything ever happens. If there's like a public questions about anything that people have interest in, if there's civil defense information, basically the times that you need information, the web infrastructure of the Japanese government is just not designed to handle it, and it always collapses. And this is what happened again during Typhoon number 19, Hagibis, or Haggis as I like to call it. Apparently a whole bunch of, including some of the worst affected areas, like people are going online to look where the evacuation areas, and they couldn't access the pages. And it's hugely frustrating that there are actually cheaper, more secure, more resilient things available out there than renting or owning a single server unit and hooking it up to the internet like most of these places do, and they just don't pay for it. They're still basically hanging on with outdated technology and saying to everyone, can you please stop using the internet so much? I mean, these are like coal-powered servers. It's ridiculous, and it's really frustrating, but it's part of Japan as well, I guess. If you're unsure to send in faxes, I guess that's what you're supposed to do. Hopefully this will improve in the near future, but there you go. There's the bullet trains underwater. And here's this thing, and this is interesting. I got corrected on a few facts about this. So Dan H, as you were pointing out as well. First of all, super interesting that Microsoft Japan did this. Now, Microsoft Japan, from what I understand, like many companies in Japan, is like international companies in Japan, I understand that they're relatively domestic. That Microsoft is a very large and pretty well established company in Japan in its own right. So I don't think this was Global HQ saying, Japan, you do this trial. This is probably Japan deciding to do it on its own. And I find that super interesting, that it's an IT company. And they decided that rather than go for 5, I made a mistake about this when I was commenting on this. I assumed that they reduced the number of working hours, and that's not the case. What they did was they did a trial where instead of working for 5 8-hour days, they reduced the working week to 4 10-hour days and gave people a 3-day weekend instead of a 4-day weekend, instead of a 2-day weekend. So it was interesting, at least in that apparently the people who ran the trial said that by the measures that they were using, efficiency improved 39.9% for employees that participated in this trial, i.e. they were apparently there were a whole bunch of rules which were interesting. Like, for example, there were rules about using email. There were rules about meetings not allowed to be longer than 30 minutes. All kinds of other things, but basically, and 92.1% said that they preferred the 4-day work week as opposed to the 5-day one. So they're going to look at repeating this trial next summer as well. But 40% increase in productivity. And I couldn't really understand that. I mean, it sounds like, okay, so they're doing nothing most of the time and now they're just working better. But 40% productivity, that's the equivalent of like working for 2 days, for 2 full days extra. I mean, it's much more than that. You think about what's 40% of a 7-day week? It's like 3 days, right? So that's basically like they are as productive as if they added 3 extra working days to the week. That's weird. Or I suppose if we're talking about working days, let's be clear. 5-day work week, that's the equivalent of adding 2 days to a work week. Basically, well, I mean, that's ridiculous to increase 40%. So I kind of want to understand more about this, but I saw a lot of people commenting. This was the most retweeted comment I've ever made on I've made in the last year on the internet. I'm curious as to why people found this interesting as well. I'm curious. Like, do people in the comments here have theories on this? I know that the immediate one is, oh, well, Japanese people are so inefficient all the time, and this just forced them to work more efficiently. And see, the other thing was, people can get more done when they're well rested and clear-headed, rather than forcing people to work tired all the time. And I subscribe to that. But there again, when I came to Japan, my first job in particular was really, really tough. I was in an IT job where, during the bad times we'd work 7 days, and we would work like 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. I would sleep 3 hours a night and go weeks without taking a break, and it turns you into a zombie. It does. But what I was really shocked and upset to find out was that you can work. I don't know how productive I was, but there's no question that I was, unfortunately, as much as I hated it, I was getting more work done working tired until 1 a.m. than I was if I had left at 7 p.m. and gotten a full night's sleep. No question I would have felt better and probably worked better, but you can work hard. But there is this philosophy in Japan, and not just Japan, by the way, I encountered this in US companies as well, that it's a good thing to work yourself to death. And I don't know, I kind of struggle with this. One thing that I also remember is that when I was talking with people about how much I was working, and it was so often that the expats that I would talk to about this, when I was really struggling with this, and they were like, well, people aren't really doing any real work anyway. They'll throw that toss-away comment. And look, it's true to the extent that Japanese work culture tends to value quality and effort, the effort and the attention to detail and quality that goes into work than pure productivity. Productivity is not a prime aim of Japanese work. If they give you 5 days to do an assignment, I learned the hard way. Submitting it 3 days early will not get you praise. It will get, why didn't you use all the time that we gave you and do extra research? And I remember I really struggled with that, but I learned that was the philosophy, and it's an artisan philosophy. That you try to get things done really well. But the truth is, this does come out. For example, in the SAP implementations that I did when I first came to Japan, I was an SAP consultant. These implementations in the US would often end up as failures, but they would at least get done within 3 months. And they could be train wrecks, but they'd get them done in 3 months. In Japan, on average, they would get done in 3 years. So I suppose 12 times longer. And they were nightmares to implement, just because it was so mainly because it was so difficult to put a German business software package into a Japanese company, because it required so much customization. But but the fact that was the opposite. What was happening often in America, places that were getting these done in 3 to 6 months, it turned out customization was needed and it was important, but they weren't even taking the time to check if it was necessary, and they were just jamming in these standard applications. And finding out later that they weren't working. But that said, what was also happening was companies and leadership would often just follow the advice of consultants to match their business processes to the standardized software, accepting that as best practices, rather than telling the software companies that you have to change your software to match up business practices. And in Japan, it's always the customer that's got the leverage in that conversation. So this is the other thing as well, that Japanese companies were not interested in becoming more efficient. They weren't calling in consultants to tell them how to improve their businesses. They would say that in the beginning, but they really believed that they knew their businesses better than anyone else, and that no outside consultants could come and tell them how to do their job any better. So you ended up being forced to do ridiculous things and contort yourself to get your software to work with what they needed. So the J-Vlog. When I was at IBM, I made quota in 3 days and gladly took an extra day off and 1 day out on call, but kind of got in trouble for it. Well, exactly, that's my point, right? And I've done that. I've submitted assignments. Quota, that sounds like sales, and that is a tough job in Japan. But I would do research assignments at my second job. And whenever I submitted them early, I was treated like I was skiving off, and you would get punished for it later on. And IBM is an example of another company I consider to be, well, of course, it's an international company, a well-known international company. In Japan, it's known as being, they've been in Japan for a very long time. They've been building mainframes for large companies and for government for a long time. And they've got a very, very Japanese sales culture, which is probably what you ran into, the J-Vlog. Jay's M says it sets a solid expectation of your hours when you go home, so you get stuck in. An open work week is fuzzy, so some people unconsciously or intentionally pace themselves. I definitely was pacing myself, and it's true as well. When I was working at a law firm, there was the thing about a law firm, it's a little bit different, is that you have to finish your work before you go home, pretty much was the principle, which meant, but the other frustrating thing was, so because you finished all your work before you came in, it didn't matter what time you came in. I know lawyers who go into the office at like 11 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. because people generally don't call up with work in the morning. In fact, it was pretty common in my line doing corporate law that investment bankers would call you up at like 6 or 7 p.m. and say, I need this turned around today, deliberately to force you to do it in less time. They're worried that if they give it to you in the morning, you'll spend more time on it, you'll still get to go home at 5 p.m. and you'll charge them 8 hours for it. Whereas, when you're charging by the hour, they deliberately jam all the work over to you at 8 p.m. or 7 p.m. and they tell you it has to get turned around, which means you're desperate to go home, so you're working as fast as you can, but you don't get to go home till 3 a.m., 4 a.m. because that's how long it takes. But I do remember when you're working, when you're tired, you do slow down. And you do pace yourself, and the work isn't as great. that's just true. And it was frustrating. There's so many days I'd have not very much to do all the way through until the evening, and I'd feel like today I can go home and spend a quiet day, and then the work starts coming in just when you want to go home. That's part of why I had to change things. But yeah, Steve from Berkeley, that's got to be hard on startup culture in Japan. That's a good point. I'm not really that familiar with startup culture, I guess is the first thing I should say. The thing is, the people I know who do startups are like startups in America. Or I don't know that they're quite full on Red Bull, not sleeping, whatever. They pretty much just live the work that they're doing. And I suppose this is true of all sort of passion industries in Japan, like creative, sort of like being magazine editors or artists or anything like that, is that they get crap pay and they sleep on the floor of the office. But yeah, truth is, I don't know. Certainly the philosophy overall like that is probably not very good for startup culture. But yeah. Hey, Te Waiwai, good to see you. And no problem for coming in late. But yeah. It's that's a good question. At the end of the day, Europe, there's all sorts of other things that this can tie into. In Europe, of course, France went to a 4-day work week. Germany's now sort of doing it. People are finding, well, there's two problems with it. One, with the upcoming increase of automation of work, there is a question about, how can they keep people busy? I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think we've found during the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have a problem of lazy people. There was unemployment, no question, when they started automating mills and whatnot. But the idea of there being, needing everybody to work less in order to maintain employment, I don't think is going to be the actual problem, but it's one of the things that's being discussed, particularly about a time when we start having AI automation running everything. There's a question as to whether people will need to work at all, and whether or not we shouldn't just be paying people a living wage just to keep the economy turning, and letting AI do all the work. These are probably issues that are like 100 years away, but they're starting to happen right now. So there is discussion about how the whole economy will have to change to deal with the natural increased productivity that's going to come with more automation. But yeah, it's super interesting to me that this worked in Japan and it works so well. And honestly, I would be really curious to see if other companies follow suit and try this experiment and if they get the same results. Curious what you people all think. Dan H, it was similar to a Scandinavia trial where people working in nursing homes, however, resulted in higher working costs for the employer. Well, there you go. And I suppose that's the other thing. When you can take for granted that people are going to work however long it takes anyway. And it also does give me the fear as well that if we had a 3-day working week, that a 4-day working week, 3-day weekend, that those people working those 4 days might be subject to even worse work. So yeah, who knows? But I thought that was super interesting anyway. This is just a random thing that, of course, right now with TPP and NAFTA and everything, sort of getting torpedoed by America. America really moving away from free trade, going more into bilateral negotiations and trying to basically strong-arm everyone that they're trading with, including their allies. It's given momentum once the TPP itself going ahead without America, but also to other free trade agreements, particularly for China. that's really being squeezed by America right now. And by the way, I think the things that China is being squeezed about, like things like allowing foreign companies to operate in China. Chinese companies can operate everywhere, but foreign companies can't operate in China. So you talk about a free trade agreement, you should have mutual terms of trade, including ability to trade the same way in each other's countries, and protection, rule of law, stuff like that. There are serious problems in China, which I think America is legitimately trying to address, and even as aggressively as they're doing, I don't think it should be left to America to do that. But that said, there's an opportunity that's opened up from this, which is that now China's become very motivated to sign free trade agreements with others, and one of the potentially biggest ones in the world is one that was being pitched involving ASEAN, Korea, Japan, China, and India, like basically 2/3 of the world's population. The fundamental problem is that right when it looked like they were about to agree, India decided, you know what, the Prime Minister Modi declared it sort of, I think he used the word Gandhian. It would upset his Gandhian principles. So basically, Gandhi had a lot of, in terms of breaking free from Britain and the British Empire, he preached self-reliance for India. The idea that Indians should take care of India first, or India should take care of Indians first, and not be so wrapped up in the idea of trying to trade with everybody else. You know, when people are starving in India. And I don't know, when it became really real, India backed out, and it's really, I don't know, to me it's really frustrating. But there again, I always did wonder how there's a lot of focus on China, of course, but India's just always kind of been socialist is maybe the wrong word, but it's kind of on that index of being towards that, of being sort of favoring. It's notoriously difficult, you know, just to get a visa to go for a business meeting there. I had to set that up, you know, to go and to a business meeting. It's a huge bureaucracy to do that. I've done M&A deals and stuff in India. They're really difficult to do. That's the bureaucracy that you have to go through for anything there. It's just setting aside the fact that they're not predisposed really to free trade in the first place. So yeah, I'm not very knowledgeable about India, I'll say that, but what little I know about India is that it's not an easy place to do international trade with, and it looks like it's by their choice that they don't want it that way. So I did wonder, I thought it'd be great if you get them in the RCEP trading deal, where we could have a free trade area that could access that amount of people in terms of a market and unlock the potential. The thing is, as well, India has a lot of English-speaking, very, very, very smart people. And when you talk about the AI and automation economy, I mean, it's natural to think that you know, between the education and intelligence of both India and China, and that, you know, basically people will not require, well, brain power will become a substitute in a way for physical labor and capital, and the economic potential that's likely to unlock. There's a huge potential for India to benefit from opening up, but particularly with the way that the economy is changing. But they're not interested, and they shut down the whole trade deal, which in the end of the day crashed it for everybody, which was kind of a shame. And if you ask me, I don't think we should wait for India. I think it's a good deal for Japan. It's a good deal for the other countries that are involved. So yeah, I don't know. India's a fascinating country, and I really wish, one, I hope I get the chance to go there one day, and two, I would like to I would like to understand it more. But I mean, just the fact that it's a country is in itself a bit of a colonial injustice. It's a whole bunch of countries that England just happened to put a flag over the top of, you know, and make one. That's part of the problems that they have there. But yeah, that was a shame. Speaking of, you know, it's getting a little bit away from Japan, a little bit depressing, so I'll skip over the next one. I'll come back to this at the end. There's only one more, which is that for $1,000 in Japan, you can actually buy a usable exoskeleton, which you can just wear, and it will help you lift like 25 kilo. It makes things apparently 25 kilograms lighter. I guess that's what that means by relieves 25 kilos of force. So already in Japan, you can see in train stations when people like are restocking vending machines on train platforms, that they have all these sort of things which can help climb stairs with heavy loads and stuff like that. The idea is apparently this is gonna, I'm not sure how it makes things lighter per se. I mean, it might make it easier to help you mechanically lift up, but you're going to be 25 kilograms heavier holding it. So I'm not exactly sure how it works, and we're not exactly talking Ripley in Aliens, you know, or anything yet. But here we have commercialized exoskeletons, you know, being sold. You can get one from Big Camera for $1,000, and there are probably a lot of companies like warehouses and places like that that are going to start equipping their employees with this. I'm curious, again, how if this means is it really going to be safe to let people go around and start carrying heavier stuff? I mean, if it does, that's super cool, and this could be seen as the first step towards full Gundam suits. But believe in yourself. I believe, talking about India, they're connected with many IT, graphic artists, web app developers, and a few orphanages, and indeed for particularly for the IT stuff and developers and so on. That's right. It's pretty much just brain power, math, internet connection, and you don't even need a full powered computer to do a lot of that work. So there's huge potential, which I think that they should be looking to unlock. Obviously it's pretty well connected anyway with the internet there, but I know, I thought this is super cool. This is a bit of the future happening now thing. Final thing is that I don't know. This sort of story makes me think if we were in a World War II situation again. By the way, the graphics here don't align very well. There is a whole person there. It's just cut off. I should probably rescope the graphics of this, the capture of this. But of course, this is a Kazakh lady. It's mainly Uyghur people in Eastern China, or Western China, sorry. There are 1 million people in re-education camps, or what they call them, training centers and education and training centers for Muslims in Western China right now, that have been forced into these camps. And from the people who have gotten out of them and been able to talk about them, they sound, well, look, there are not crematorium. They're not. There is no evidence that people are being mass exterminated in these camps. So it's maybe slightly a step too far to compare this to say that these are the same as the Nazi concentration camps. But remembering what the definition of a concentration camp is, of course, Nazi concentration camps were used for genocide. And they, in a sense, became genocide camps from that purpose. But concentration camps, in terms of the generic term that existed until they got the Nazi Association, these were camps where people of a particular group are aggregated for detention and concentrated in, and basically concentrated in these prison camps as a form of punishment. It was used by the British in South Africa in the Boer War, and it was used in New Zealand for conscientious objectors during World War II. It was used in America for rounding up not just Japanese, but apparently even there were some Italians and so on. In Australia they used them as well. They would round up people of certain ethnicities and put them in these prison camps to detain them during the war. And most of these places, they were not great places to be in, and they were inherently an injustice. If you were, basically of Japanese heritage but an American and put in one of these camps, it was an injustice. But when they set up concentration camps in Germany, it was the same idea. It was a place to round up all of the Jews and all of the Gypsies and all the other groups of people that they were rounding up and putting in them, and put them in these prison camps, and they were using them for forced labor, which was common as well. And it's not like the murder made them bad. This is an evil thing to do. And we found out after World War II, we suspected during World War II, but we found out after World War II that, okay, these concentration camps that we knew about, we didn't do anything about, were mass killing people afterwards. I look at the story that comes up every now and then about what's going on in West China right now, and I think, hey Ty, good to see you. If we were looking at Germany, if this were a World War II situation again, we'd always think that, given what we know about the Holocaust now, would not the world act with such outrage and react and go and try to break all the Jews out of the camps, or try to do something, at least during the war? Like, during the war, they didn't even really pay much attention to the concentration camps. It really wasn't until after the war. And we always like to think that when we learn the history of World War II, that we wouldn't allow such a thing to happen again. And of course, that's not true. It's happened in Europe. It's happened in Yugoslavia. It's happened in Africa. Genocide has happened. Killing camps have happened again. But we always still like to think, no matter, that when you've seen this thing happen so many times in the 20th century, that we wouldn't sit by the idea that that's something that happened in history, that somehow was allowed to happen, and now we all know better because now we know about it, we would stop it happening again. Well, you listen to the stories of the people who are basically being rounded up, terrorized and put into these camps, and they're talking here about mass rape, beatings, torture. This is genocide, and it's happening right now to millions of people. In a country that we're still talking about doing free trade deals with and everything else, like they don't matter. I find that really Like, is this really okay? So, day and age, don't forget what's happening in Kashmir as well. They're even locking up doctors who show up on the news saying that their hospitals are running out of medicine. Well, indeed, when they did the recent partition of Kashmir, they locked down Kashmir a lot they basically locked down the whole region. And yes, they were using tactics which were extremely authoritarian for a democratic country to be doing what India did in Kashmir before they announced the reorganization, and are still doing. I mean, they've cut off that region. They've effectively imprisoned that whole region. That seems to be kind of what's happened, in order to manage the transition there. And I agree, just as concerning. And there are other places in the world where this kind of thing is happening as well. And and Kashmir has 7 million people, so you could say a bigger scale. But what India's not doing is they're not building camps, run by people to rape and torture systematically, and systematically arresting the entire population and moving them into these prison camps. I mean, what China's doing is still a step beyond, it wasn't this organized in Africa. It was much more ad hoc, in Yugoslavia, where admittedly it was for killing. But we are kind of standing by, and we know that this is happening. And even the neighbors of China, including Kazakhstan, there are many Kazakhs who are getting wrapped up in this as well. And people don't seem to be able to do anything about it. Hell, we're seeing, Hong Kong sort of going through. Hong Kong's getting a lot of attention, and it's true, the media can't even get into this region, so of course it's very hard to report on. But it's like, if the media can't report on it, we can't care about it. It is something that we should care more about, and it's something that bothers me, that it's happening, and we know that it's happening. But Steve from Berkeley, well, even if it's not anything new, it's always been, under different names. They've always had re-education camps in China. It's always been, there's always been a political element to it. Of course, during the Great Leap Forward and all that sort of stuff in the Cultural Revolution, there was complete anarchy through the whole country, and there were people all over the place being sort of killed and whatnot at random. But the idea of these sort of systematic prison camps being built and whole populations being deported, you're right, I guess the Russians did this, under Stalin and whatnot, and I suppose it's probably happened in parts, of course, Tibet, we've seen this sort of happen, but the modern way that it's being done, it's really disturbing. And don't think that the technologies that are being tested and learned, the mass surveillance being used to facilitate all of this, are not going to be used in elsewhere, including, we have someone talking about Hong Kong there in the comments, and there's no reason I think this won't be used in Hong Kong and other places either, and don't think that democratic countries like the US and European countries are not looking to learn. Look, just the same way that when after World War II, when they found out that Japanese scientists and German scientists had been experimenting on people, the West was more than happy to collect their scientific data and apply the benefits from Western medicine and science, from unethical experiments that were carried out on people. And look, when you look at the way that China's experimenting with AI and mass population control, you have to wonder how this is not just a China thing, and we shouldn't look at it that way. So anyway, that's not a China thing. It's not a Japan thing to finish, but it's a huge thing that isn't getting enough news coverage. That is the show. That's all the topics that I've got. The J-Vlog, as a matter of nomenclature, calling China calling it the incident. So what qualifies as a massacre? Well, and there's a problem with the by the way, there was a fantastic documentary that I watched. I think it's called The Heavenly Gate. It's on YouTube. It's 2 hours, and it features interviews with the protest leaders. It's really long, and it actually shows to me the best picture of what happened in Tiananmen that I've ever seen. But it also highlights that it's really not clear what happened. Not to play down or anything. It's not disputed that there were that the crackdown there was pretty brutal, but the way that it's described, in different places, it kind of the great story of those protests and how confused the protest movement itself was, and how how completely internally it was a mess. When the crackdown happened, most people were out of the square before it happened, but people in the middle of the square were not actually the ones massacred. It was around the square where the army units started closing in, that they started coming in and shooting at people more aggressively. But yeah, they've just done a very good job of managing the information around that, and it's still, most people still, all that they know is that thousands of students disappeared and were never seen again by their families, which implies reasonably that there were thousands of people killed, but nobody's been able to find the bodies. There's they just did an amazing job clamping it down. But the other point being that people are careful with nomenclature to avoid censorship. So well worth looking up on YouTube, The Heavenly Gate. It's a fascinating documentary, one of the most interesting documentaries I've seen in a long time, so I would recommend that. Yeah. Day and Age, they've just done that they've tens of thousands of deaths with only military trials and no punishment to the soldiers. This is in India. This has been going on since partition. Well, certainly, of course, Indian abuses in Kashmir have been going on for a long time. Myanmar had a similar thing as well, of course, with the Rohingya things recently, and exactly what you're describing there as well, Dan H. Unfortunately, it still is part of the way of the world, and it seems to be continuing. And we shouldn't take for granted that this is someone else's problem, and that is not something we should be concerned about, both selfishly and altruistically. That's the show. That is exactly 1 hour. Should I play a tune or should I wrap up? Yeah, sorry, a bit depressing there at the end there, but I guess those are the topics that I had. Hope you found it interesting. It's been kind of a quiet week. Tune, please, says to YY. So I'm going to do a tune. I'm kind of feeling like doing a tune. Hopefully, we can get some graphics this week. It's always touch and go whether the HDMI cable works. So let me. By the way, this case that I've got, this Logitech case, it bends like this. It's the best iPad case I've ever found. They don't sell them anymore, and it's crazy. To me, this is like the best thing I've ever used. Let me plug in some sound here and switch over into. Is that gonna work? I saw the screen jumping around like it might work, but it didn't in the end. Give me a genre. Give me something. What should I play? Acid jazz. I like that. Okay, I'm gonna go for that. Let's check sound. 1 2 1 2. Let's just check. Can you hear that? Okay, that's from last week. I think I've got that one saved, so I'm going to do a new track. What's BPM for acid jazz? I don't know. Let's do 125. Let's do a jazzy beat. In fact, let's do drum and bassy acid jazz. Let's make it faster. In fact, let's go into. Let's make it 174. Okay, give me a sec. 174. Okay, so I've got a beat to start. Let's do a bit of a jazzy bass. Let's pick a. Hey, good night. Okay, let's do. Oh, that's recording. Cowbells. Oh, nice. The show. I'm going to sign it out there. Thanks for joining again. I'll see you again next week. Everyone have a good week, and boom, peace. I'll fade that out a little bit. Hey, Tuwawa, see you later. And if it sounds like a White Cat or Shield match, I guess I succeeded. Have a good one. Boom.